On this week's Political Figure episode, we answer the question of what does a box of chocolates and a South Dakota governor have in common? Turns out they'll both kill your dog. Kristi Noem was born November 30th, 1971 in Watertown, South Dakota. She graduated from Hamlin High School in 1990 and was crowned South Dakota Snow Queen, which I assume is a lot like an ice queen, and that's fitting. She then went to Northern State University, but eventually would drop out after getting pregnant with a daughter she decided to name Cassidy with a K, because of course she did. So she went back to living on her family farm, but it turned out farming alone didn't allow her to murder enough things, so she added a hunting lodge to the property as well. It was during this time that Kristi DeVille would take an untrained puppy named Cricket out hunting with customers, hoping that it would just see the other dogs that were trained doing hunting and be able to do it itself. And surprisingly, it didn't do that, because it hadn't been trained to. So she took it home and took it to a gravel pit and murdered it. Now, I just want to tell you what I think about you, Kristi Noem, here, because this is Sedona. This is my hunting dog who I messed up with. See, the first time I took her out when she was untrained, and I took her out with a bunch of people, and a bird got up, and all the people shot, and it scared her, and she ran and hid underneath the car. And now she's gun shy. So, yeah, you're useless, but you're cute. That was 6 years ago, and guess what? I didn't murder her because of it. Once again, that was my fault, and I don't deal with my failures by shooting dogs. Or goats, because she did that too. I guess she just had a goat she decided smelled bad, and she took that to the gravel pit and murdered it. But not before going back to the house and having to reload, because apparently she's a horrible shot and a genuine sociopath. We know about these instances because 20 years later, she would write an autobiography bragging about doing it. She even titled the chapter, "A Bad Day to Be a Goat." She is a fucking sociopath. But not content with murdering innocent animals, she decided she wanted to do her part to help murder America. So she started her political career by running for the South Dakota State House. She spent her time there basically just bitching about property taxes and gun rights, and then 4 years later ran for the U.S. House of Representatives in South Dakota. Once a U.S. Congress thing, canine killer Kristi donned this super Karen cut for some fucking reason and started making all of our lives more miserable. She sponsored bills to ban women's health and reproductive care nationwide, and other bills to define personhood and life at fertilization. She's one of those sociopaths who'll preach about how frozen embryos are precious life while she's going to make more red ferns grow in the gravel pit. She also hates that the environment exists. She doesn't believe in climate change. She sponsored bills to block the EPA from researching air pollution. She opposes protecting grassland. She's a big fan of getting drilled and having pipe laid. And I'm not talking about the man she cheats on her husband with. Allegedly. I'm talking about her wanting to end the moratorium on drilling in the Gulf of Mexico, because that went so well the last time. And I'm sure it goes without saying that she loves her some big oily pipes like the Keystone XL. In fact, she loves them so much that when people were protesting those big oily pipes penetrating native land, she passed legislation to crack down on protesting. She made it so the state would cover the policing and security costs for oil corporations that were having protesters try to block the pipes. And she passed legislation that encouraged suing protest organizers. And to be clear, this was later when she was governor, and then she got the shit sued out of her for that because, it was a blatant violation of the First Amendment. But anyway, all of those views have been consistent throughout her entire political career. She also really hates people having health care. She opposes the Affordable Care Act in every way. She also continuously talks about how she wants to make massive cuts to Medicaid and the VA, citing concerns about the deficit, all while bragging about how she supported and voted for the biggest deficit ballooning budget in the history of the United States under the Trump administration, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So she doesn't actually give a shit about the deficit. She just really likes seeing sick veterans not get the care that they need. Or old people or children, just anybody who's not rich enough to donate to her campaign. And in 2018, she decided she had enough of Congress and ran for governor of South Dakota and won because people in South Dakota are stupid. And there she continued her anti-women's rights crusades, activating trigger laws as soon as Roe was overturned. She spent so much time shit-talking natives that they banned her from going to any of the reservations in South Dakota, which meant that the governor of South Dakota was barred from almost a quarter of South Dakota. When the National Park Service said they couldn't have fireworks at Mount Rushmore for the 4th of July because it risked setting the state on fire, she fought tooth and nail to try to be allowed to set the state on fire with fireworks at Mount Rushmore. During COVID, I gotta give her credit though, she did her best to help Darwin do his job. She didn't enforce any containment measures and supported mass gatherings of morons at things like Sturgis. She didn't make any businesses close. She didn't force any type of social distancing, even at her own fundraisers. She even went out of her way to make it harder for people who wanted to remove themselves from situations where they could die, like going to work at the meatpacking plants that super spread the disease, by being the only state that declined taking the federal unemployment funding, saying, oh, we don't need it because our unemployment is really low. Partially because people couldn't get the unemployment funding, and also it wasn't low. It was at 10%, which which is up from 3.5% before the pandemic started. How she managed to make a state with like 9 fucking people in it a super spreader state is honestly impressive. But she did. Like, cases were through the roof. Like 1.5 hospitals were overrun. It was bad. She also ran her campaign on government transparency and then went out of her way to be like illegally obscure. At one point, even refusing to release the results of a publicly funded study on the alleged presence of critical race theory in public schools because, you know, there wasn't any, and that didn't fit very well with the lies and propaganda she'd been telling people. She also fired the director of the South Dakota Appraisers Program for not giving her daughter, Cassidy with a K, a real estate license after she failed the real estate test. And then when she sued them over wrongful termination, they intimidated her into taking a $200,000 shut the fuck up check and made her sign a non-disclosure agreement. Transparency. She was actually investigated for this as a conflict of interest by the state legislative branch, but it failed pretty much along partisan lines. Go figure. She also endorsed a dental office in one of their advertisements, which is a weird and unethical thing for a public official to do. But weird and unethical is kind of her MO. Like when she decided she wanted to send the South Dakota National Guard to the border to help defend it against the make-believe crisis. And because that would have been, you know, really fucking expensive, a Tennessee billionaire, for some reason, Willis Johnson, offered to pay for it. But that also illegal, because, you know, you can't have billionaires just renting out the National Guard. There'd be some clearly serious implications if, you know, they were allowed to do that. She also spent like 70 grand of taxpayer money on imported Indian rugs for the governor's mansion, which is a thing that seems maybe slightly unethical. I mean, honestly, I don't know why she didn't just save the money and make the rugs out of her dog. Seems like that would have been, you know, more her style. She's also tried passing bills that would have forced kids to pray in school, which failed for obvious reasons. She clearly hates LGBTQ people of all types. She opposes marijuana legalization, and she had the state sponsor a meth awareness campaign called Meth. We're on it. Which might be the most honest message to come out of South Dakota since her election, and it was written by a Minnesota advertising firm, and I can't help but believe that they were trolling the shit out of South Dakota and knew that they'd be too dumb to notice. She also spent a fair amount of time crying about how her Lord and Savior, Donald Trump's trade war with China, was killing the agricultural industry in South Dakota, which is basically their only industry. So it's nice to see that her and the rest of the great disappointment of South Dakota stopped supporting slightly melted creamsicle Caligula after he completely decimated their economy and swore up and down that he would do the same shit again if they elected him again. Just kidding, they didn't stop supporting him, and now they're all shocked that the leopards are in fact eating their faces. I literally just watched an interview with a South Dakota dairy farmer who's crying because Trump is rounding up all of the Mexicans who milk his cows, and the interviewer was like, yeah, but he told you that he was going to round up all of the Mexicans who milk your cows. And he's like, yeah, I know, but I didn't think he'd do it to like my Mexicans. I need my Mexicans to make money or I wouldn't be profitable. I thought he was going to round up all the bad Mexicans, not the good Mexicans that I need. And like, Trumpers, I just want to tell you that like when we say that we think that you are genuinely the dumbest people to ever exist in the history of civilization, I just want to let you know that genuinely we mean it. Y'all have fewer neural connections than the cow pies y'all can't afford to clean up anymore because Trump took the Mexicans that did it for you. You are anomalies of science. Anyway, back to our original story, Kristi Goetz. She is no longer governor of South Dakota because she is now the director of Homeland Security. Her qualifications include lying about meeting Kim Jong-un once in her autobiography and not knowing how the National Guard works. But hey, I guess if we have an uprising of smelly goats and untrained puppies, then she's our man. This is what 77 million of you voted for, guys. Again, anomalies of fucking science.